Ed is the president and CEO of the Terrence Group, one of the most respected and successful survey research and strategy teams in American politics today. Widely recognized as one of the country's leading political strategists, Goes is an often sought-after consultant and has played a key role in the winning campaigns of Governor John Kasich, Governor Mary Fallin, and Senator John Boozman. You also may have seen him during some of his regular appearances on national public affairs programs, including Meet the Press, This Week, Good Morning America, The NewsHour, Fox News, MSNBC, and CNN. Please welcome Ed Goes.
Thank you very much. Do I need to turn?
I think you're good.
Okay. Thank you very much. And one of the things I warned them is asking a pollster to talk in short time periods is a rather difficult thing to do. But I want to cover a couple of things today that I think will be helpful to the discussion, kind of understanding what's going on out there. Let me say, I've been doing this for a long time. I worked my first campaign when I was 12 years old. In 1964, when my dad was in Vietnam, and I wanted to understand why he was there and what was going on. I went down and volunteered in the presidential campaign, and it was kind of off and running since then. I have to say the last couple of years has been rather different, rather unique, and very hard to kind of tell what's up and what's down. But let me start first with, because I think it's a very important part of the discussion and part of what your group is trying to do, explain a little bit about off-year elections. So much has gotten wrong, or is wrong in terms of polling, in terms of assumptions. It represents all people, that it represents who's going to vote on election day. Reality is that if you look at the numbers nationwide, there's about 70% of eligible adults, meaning they are citizens and 18 or over, who are registered to vote. 70%. That number hasn't changed through the years. No matter what they try, early voting, motor voter registration, it hasn't changed the number of Americans who are registered to vote. In a presidential year, 70% of that 70% vote. In a presidential year, 70% of that 70%. So approximately 50% of eligible adults vote. In a non-presidential year, about 50% of that 70%, or 35% of eligible adults vote in an election. And so very often the media plays an election as, it's kind of like everyone woke up, went to bed as a Democrat and woke up the next morning and they're a Republican. That's not what happens. In a presidential year, you have a much higher turnout. You have younger people voting at a higher rate. You have independent voters voting at a higher rate. In an off-election year, non-presidential year, the independents tend to stay home. The senior vote, 65 and older, grows from about 25% to about 40% in the off year. And the biggest factor in a non-presidential year is the factor of intensity. And the intensity is, at least in recent years, has been driven by who owns the White House. The out party is always more intense than the party of the White House. There is a tendency with the American public that it's easier to scream with alarm than point with pride. And that certainly comes into effect in a non-presidential year. And if you look at the last few off-year elections, 1996, Republicans had the White House. The Democrats had a vote intensity advantage of 8 points. And no matter what the Republicans tried to do, they hit hard on immigration, trying to get their base excited. That did not happen. And we ended up losing a good number of seats. In 2010 and 2014, the Democrats were at a disadvantage. In 2010, it was a 10-point disadvantage of the Democratic voters being 10 points less intense about voting than the Republican voters. It actually grew to an 11-point advantage in 2014. And so again, it wasn't a huge wave of people changing parties as much as who tended to turn out in that election when you're down to kind of the base vote. The independents not voting, younger voters not voting. What we don't know in this election is where do we stand with what's been happening with the Trump vote? I think everyone's been kind of trying to figure out the Trump vote ever since the election. It was really fairly simple in that it was very different, but very easy to kind of look at. Let me just mention, and I'm not saying positive, negative about Donald Trump, but one of the things people have missed, the news media has missed, a lot of the pollsters have missed, is the day Donald Trump got into the presidential race, he had a 55% unfavorable rating. The day he won the White House, he had a 55% unfavorable rating. Today, Donald Trump has a 54% unfavorable rating. He came into this race with a group of voters, about 33% of the electorate, that, as he says, I could shoot someone on the corner of Fifth Avenue and they would still support me. And that is true from everything I've seen through the last 3 years in terms of Donald Trump. Also, what we had in Hillary Clinton is Hillary Clinton started off her presidential election at a 48% unfavorable rating. And by election day, it was a 55% unfavorable rating matching Donald Trump's. What was different and hard to tell in the presidential race is that normally what we have in a presidential race, and it's fairly predictable, is you have about 70% of the electorate, usually fairly evenly split, that half like one candidate and dislike the other, and vice versa with the other half. And they are your partisans, they are your party people, and the party's actually fairly split when it comes to that. You then have about 2 or 3, sometimes it gets up to 4 or 5%, that dislike both candidates. Usually it's about 2 or 3%. They tend to be, as we have tracked them, non-voters. They are so cynical about the system, they kind of talk about it during the presidential year, but by the time election day comes, they stay at home and don't vote. The swing vote, which is made up of independents, soft Democrats, and soft Republicans, usually about 25%, start off liking both candidates, and as they get into the summer, post-convention, fall campaign, they then either come to dislike one or really like another one. And that's the swing vote, and that's what the two campaigns are trying to do in terms of going after those votes. In 2016, we had that 70% evenly split between the two candidates. But the number of voters who liked both candidates at the beginning of the process, the beginning of the summer, was 3%. 3% liked both, as opposed to 25%. The number that disliked both candidates was running 23, 24%. And by election day, even the exit polling showed 19% of those people who disliked both candidates voted on election day. They disliked both candidates, 19% of the voters. And so it became a big focus of the media for a lot of us on what happened was not a lot of movement on the negatives, not a lot of movement on the positives, but the intensity on the negatives went up to both candidates, to a point that on election day, both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump had 50% of the American public strongly unfavorable towards them. What they missed was that while Hillary was not raising the intensity of her favorables, Donald Trump was. They started off that way and became that much more intense. And so I always felt that whoever was going to win the presidential election was going to be who became the focus of the negative last. And as you know, Hillary Clinton became the focus of the negative last with the FBI report. On top of that, Donald Trump believed in the last 2 weeks that he was going to lose. I can't tell you the number of emails I got from Trump staffers saying, when we lose this election, can you help me kind of get my foot back in working someplace? They thought they were going to lose. And as a result, Donald Trump stopped doing the rallies and saying kind of crazy things at the rallies that the press loved to cover. He stopped tweeting for the last 10 days of the campaign. And at the end of the day, that ended up to be the positive because he was like a boxer with a glass jaw. Every time he led the attack, it may have pushed the attack against Hillary, but it also raised the intensity of his negatives. Because they were reacting to the persona, not necessarily the issues he was talking about. And so you ended up with this kind of perfect storm with Republican senators. I was in the field in 5 states the last week, and we had them winning in all 5 states: Ohio, Florida, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Nevada. The only one of those he didn't win was Nevada. And the only reason why I believe he lost Nevada was he didn't have an incumbent U.S. senator running for re-election who was doing the get out the vote. But one of the most unreported things in the campaign was that, yes, the African-American vote was down almost 1%. The white vote was actually up almost 1% in the election. But there was a shift of 5% less of the white vote voting in the suburbs and an 8% increase in small-town America. And that was the difference in the campaign. So that brings us to Trump today and where we're at. And Trump, the electorate is very interesting. There's that 33% that is there. There's another 11 or 12% that like his policies but don't like his persona, but give him a positive on job approval because they like his policies and put a priority on that. That's why today, if you look at the polling, he's running in the mid-40s in terms of his job approval, because he's added on top of that 33% the other 11 and 12%. There's another 11% that like his policies but don't like his persona, but put a priority on his persona, the way he acts every day, the incivility of some of what he says, how he tweets all the time, how he's always attacking people. Those people are why when you ask a specific on jobs, like job approval on the economy or jobs or taxes, they give him over a 50% approval rating. And it's just totally confusing to everyone kind of watching the environment. Well, here's where we are for this year. And I do all this to say I can't make a prediction of what's going to happen because we're in unknown territory. The intensity gap that should be 8, 9, 10, 11 points in the advantage of the Democrats is only a 4-point advantage. Because one of the things Trump seems to have a gut instinct about is constantly stirring the pot with that 32% base. He's always playing to them on everything he does and everything he says. And it's keeping their intensity up. So it's very hard to predict, is it then going to go over to just ground game and who does a better job of turning out their vote? When they talk to all of you about being involved to push the initiatives or fight the initiatives, depending on the position, you getting your supporters out are extremely important and more important in a non-presidential year than in a presidential year. What do I think is going to happen? My guess is that the House is going to be very hard to keep in control of the Republicans. Currently, if you look at the lineup on the House map, you need 218 for control. There are 199 districts that are in kind of lean to safe Democrat districts. There are 193 that are lean Republican or Republican districts. And then there are 43 what they call toss-up districts. So if the Democrats win their 199, they only have to add 20 more to get to their 218. In that toss-up list of 42, only 2 are Democratic districts. The other 40 are Republican districts. In an even year, even in terms of both sides kind of even going into the battle, it's very hard on those toss-ups to come out much better than a 60-40 split. But in a year that's probably going to be somewhat of an edge against you, having to win a majority of those 42 seats or 43 seats are going to be very difficult. The Senate is somewhat different. The Senate, you have currently 45 seats that are in the Democratic column, a couple of those being Republicans. You have 48 that are in the Republican column. You have 7 toss-up seats, of which are 4 Democrats and 3 Republicans. 2 of the Republican seats are open seats, Arizona and Tennessee, and then you have the Nevada Senate seat. So the chances of coming out of that, maybe not picking up any seats for Republicans, but breaking even, are much, much better in terms of holding on to the Senate. The one district I will throw out to you, I don't know if you're watching it, is Mississippi has what they call a jungle primary on election day to replace Thad Cochran. And if no one gets 50%, the top 2 vote getters then go into a runoff election the first Tuesday of December. There is a scenario, my nightmare scenario, because I'm doing the race, is that we end up with 50 Republican seats and 49 Democratic seats, and that's going to be the difference between do we have a split Senate or do, in fact, we have 51 seats. Because at that point, in that 4-week time period, all of a sudden, all bets are off. I think every Democrat and Republican dollar in the country is going to be fighting for control of that. On the governor's seats, real quickly, that's not getting much attention in Washington because all the attention is what's happening in Washington. What's going to happen in the Senate, what's going to happen in the House, what's going to happen with Donald Trump. Currently, the Republicans have 33 of the 50 governors. There's 1 independent, and the rest are Democratic seats. There are 8 toss-up seats in terms of could go either way. All 8 of those are Republican seats. The one that probably should be in that group is also Colorado as an open seat. Most of the public polling, and I think a lot of the private polling, are showing that race just being neck and neck. But it's just, I think, an assumption that it's going to be more of a Democratic year. They're putting it into a lean Democrat seat right now. I would put it into a toss-up, and one that I think eventually will get a lot of attention. So that's kind of the environment. If you're looking for a prediction, I think I would say we lose control, or Republicans lose control of the House. I think they keep control but don't gain seats in terms of the Senate, with some Democrat seats becoming Republican and vice versa, Republican seats becoming Democrat. And I think the governors are going to come out not only fairly split, but I think very late in the campaign a major focus when so many people will come to realize that the governor elected this year will be the one overseeing redistricting in the state. And so it will have a whole different factor, especially if it looks like the House is up for grabs. So let me end there.
Join the panel here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ed. And before we get started, let me briefly introduce Chip Reimer. Chip is the Senior Vice President of Global Operations for Noble Energy. In 2016, he moved to Denver with the assignment of Senior Vice President of Noble Energy's U.S. onshore, which included the DJ Basin, Marcellus, Eagle Ford, and Permian. And by moving to Denver, he suddenly became a political expert, which he never knew he was going to be in his career. And perhaps most importantly, he serves as our COGA board chairman and also sits on the Protect Colorado committee. So welcome, Chip. Thank you for joining us. Before I ask a question of Chip, Ed, briefly just tell us if what the sentiment in Colorado is. What does it look like in terms of that voter intensity?
Well, make sure I'm on here. Voter intensity seems to be running about the same as the rest of the country. It's kind of hard to tell because while Colorado is not a blue state, it certainly is looking fairly purple. So there's a mix in terms of the numbers you're seeing in terms of intensity. In terms of all the races that everyone's looking at, it seems to be very much kind of up in the air, and again, kind of reinforcing a purple state. But the intensity of the vote is going to be the key factor in the final months on does it move more Republican, does it move more Democrat, especially what happens in the governor's race.
Great. Let's talk a little bit, Chip, about give us an overview of what this election looks like for our industry.
Yeah, I want to say a couple things before I answer that question. So on behalf of the board, I just would like to thank all of you for attending this conference for the last 2 days. Also would like to thank Dan and his staff. You guys do a fabulous job over here, so thank you so much for what you do every day for the state of Colorado. And Ed, I look forward to the discussion, so thanks. Yeah, the intensity of this election going forward. This is going to be probably one of the most consequential elections in state history for our industry. But I also think it's going to be for the state and for the families of the state. And I'll go into that in a little bit. And I think that's because of 97 that's out there, the 2,500-foot setback, and I'll do a little more discussion a little bit later on that. But this is extremely impactful for hundreds of thousands of families in this state. It is huge. And so you saw earlier that we had the gubernatorial candidates up here, and you saw their passion, what's going on. So we have that going on. Remember, who's ever elected there is going to be choosing who's in the Capitol and where the positions are going to be and those kind of things. So that can be extremely impactful for the state and for our industry. You have the Attorney General's race. And the Attorney General's race, those are the guys that are out there that are, determining our laws and are we following the laws of the state of Colorado. It can be very impactful. And then historically in our state is our state House and state Senate representatives. And typically we've been the House has been Democratic and the Senate's been Republican by just a seat or so. But that balance allows our industry and other industries to kind of maintain the right balance. So if you're not political, I'll tell you what, to your point, Dan, 4 years ago, I could give a hoot about politics, okay? And now I'm in the heart of it. So I would tell you this, you better get that intensity, that passion. I'm glad I got my bouncer here in case someone shows up. Appreciate you for doing what you're doing. But if you did not see the three folks that came out here, the activists, you better feel their passion. It's passionate out there. If we don't have that same passion to match it, there'll be an issue. So that intensity is going to have to come out there. So this is an extremely impactful year for the state of Colorado and for the families of Colorado.
Great. Let's talk about 97 a little bit. What is it? How does it impact our industry?
Hey, can you pull up the map? I've got 2 slides. I won't bore you with too many PowerPoints. Can they hear me? Up there?
It's there.
Oh, there it is. Cool. So 97, a group called Colorado Rising are the folks that generated this thing. It's kind of interesting. It's a little different from what it was 2 years ago. That they carved out federal lands this time. But I keep telling people this irks me the most when I talk about this is, about $530,000 were raised to put this on the ballot. I assume it's going to be on the ballot. We have to assume it's going to be on the ballot. And it came up from 2 sources, from Boulder and Washington, D.C. 90% of it came from Boulder and Washington, D.C. So the 530,000, 490,000 came from outside sources and a small group. And it irks me when I think about that, people outside the state are trying to run our state. So that drives me crazy when I think about it. So, but if you look at this thing, so it's a 2,500-foot setback. It's from all oil and gas facilities, pipeline facilities, wells, you name it across it. 2,500-foot setback from structures, but also from vulnerable areas. So when you're talking about vulnerable areas, you're talking lakes, rivers, dry creek beds, public areas, potentially roads. It's public areas. So you look at it. And so you look at this map here, and what does that do? The red, and we grabbed this map off the state, and then I think Protect Colorado enhanced it a little bit there to make sure you can see the right colors and all that stuff. So, but the red is basically off limits there. You see the white where we can drill. You see the 5 counties. Okay, there's 5 oil and gas counties. And a lot of people in the state don't realize. They just think you can go pop a well anywhere. But there's 5 oil and gas counties, and you can see those 5 oil and gas counties. 94% of the non-federal, that means private and state land, is off limits. 85 for the state. It is huge. It is a band. Don't believe it's around safety. This is a ban. It's to drive you out of the state. We've seen them up at the Capitol. We've seen them up at the State House. They want this to be like marijuana, ground zero, started here, spread it across the country. So, I mean, that's, if I look at that, Dan, that's if that doesn't get your blood boiling, we need to be engaged in something like this. We need to be passionate about it.
Let's talk about some of the impacts. I know there's been a couple studies out that have talked about job losses and financial losses. And I think one of the things that people don't always understand is that this isn't just about the oil and gas industry. It certainly is about our jobs, but there's much more at stake than just that. So
that's a very good point. So there's been some analysis done economically, and you're looking at probably between 150,000 jobs lost in a 10 to 12 year period. So I always like to make that analogy. What does that mean? So if you think of that type of people, that's the size of Greeley. That's the size of Pueblo. The size of Boulder is what that is. And so you think about that, these become ghost towns. But that's assuming everybody in that town works, okay? And that's not the case. So you then take a family of four and you have somebody, one breadwinner. You multiply that 4 or 5, you're talking 400,000 or 500,000 people, families that don't have jobs, that don't have money coming in, those kind of things. That's the size of Colorado Springs, our second largest city in our state. Colorado Springs, second largest city in the state. Gone, ghost town. So you're sitting there with your family, you want to buy groceries, you want to buy, bikes for your kids, you want to get fuel, you want to get a ticket to go to a movie. There's no income coming in for that in this entire town. You want to go buy skis or snowboards, which actually comes from oil and gas, but you want to go do that, you don't have the dollars for that. There's nothing to do. That's a lost economy gone. Okay, huge gone. So you're talking billions of dollars of taxes gone, probably close to $8 billion of tax, and $200 to $220 billion of GDP growth economy to this state. It is a giant hole for this state. So it's one of those things that's just so impactful that's the part of the message is we've got to get out to folks to understand how big a hole this is.
So how can we best fight it?
Go to the second slide I've got here coming forward, if you don't mind. If you can get it up there. There's key messages that can do this. And I want to talk about some messages. I want to also talk about, there's a group out here called Protect Colorado that you'd mentioned. So Protect Colorado is basically built on a campaign for ballot measures. And it's alignment of majority of this industry. We have trade groups like KOGA, we have trade groups like CPC or API, we have other industries involved. That's the nice thing about it. This is a huge alignment of people that understand the devastating impacts of the state. And so they understand the kind of the messages that we need to do, the things you need to do. So if you guys have your phones, these are the messages right here. These are the things that drive this number. And I'm going to tell you right now, 70% of this state, plus or minus, favors oil and gas, okay? But they do not know the impacts of 2,500, of 97. They do not know it, okay? And if they do not know it, if you were to vote today, they wouldn't vote in favor of it because they do not know the impacts, okay? You got 75 days to get passionate, get intense. I challenge all operators, all service providers, people with employees, challenge your folks to get out there on social media, ground game, talk to people. Challenge them to talk to 10 people a day, 20 people a day. You can imagine how that spreads across the board. We have to have the intensity and passion that the other side has, okay? And it's huge. So when you look at it, take these down. This is a job killer, okay? This is a family. This destroys family in our state. This destroys generation after generation. Think about it. People are trying to get incomes for their kids for the next generation. It is hurting them. The size of Colorado Springs. And it's being funded by folks from outside of this state. This is a ban. There's nothing around safety on this thing, or they would include dry creek beds and other areas. They include that cars, all that. You saw that turn red in there. Okay? There's no science around 2,500. There's a science to make sure it's a ban, and that's what they want to have done. Okay? So it's critical to that, to understand that it's so impactful for things. The other thing that drives, you see a point down there, this is not, as my point is, it's only 23% is oil and gas jobs. The rest of it is everybody else that ties to us, that works the things that we do. You saw the mayor on Monday come here and say, we got 25,000 people here that average $200,000 a family coming in. Those are all gone. Those are huge impacts to the state. So that's the kind of stuff that we need to be messaging, talking to folks out there. So that's what you can do. Get on social media, pound social media, ground game. We have Protect Colorado that manages it. They're going to do the stuff all around the TV and the radio ads and all those kind of things that gets across the board. Guys like me, old guys that watch TV and read newspapers and all that kind of stuff. I need you guys that get out there that do the social media. Ping yourself. Go across the board. Say a prayer at church in front of everybody. Tell them to put it so everybody understands what it is. Okay? We can use help from both sides all over. Okay? I would just tell you right now, you guys got to get engaged, and you have to tell every day, anybody, if you're in line, you're waiting for a movie, you're waiting for grocery stores, you talk about the value of our industry. You've heard it today, the quality of life that comes from Peter D. They've got to know that. You've got to connect the dots.
Yeah. I thought it was really gratifying to see throughout the conference, starting with Mayor Hancock talking about the economic impact, Kelly Brough from the Denver Metro Chamber this morning talking about leading the fight and trying to get other groups to oppose Initiative 97 as well, and then to have both of our gubernatorial candidates here today clearly stating that they oppose this initiative, both Walker Stapleton and Jared Polis. We have a few minutes left. Chip, I want to ask you if there's other ballot initiatives that we should be aware of as an industry.
Yeah, there's probably a couple others. I know the one that Kent Theory's running, it's the gerrymandering. I think it's Proposition Y and Z. I think that's a good governance as we go forward. It's how they craft the districts. They do it after they go and do the census, and I think that one makes sense. I know that Congressman Polis mentioned 108. That's one that's being run by the Colorado Farm Bureau, but what I know about it anyways, seems like our takings, what they call takings, your property right takings in the state is pretty weak. So there's been some cases in the state where literally people have lost 90% of their value of their property, their assets, and yet they don't get compensated. They're down to literally, they only get 5 or 10% value, and they don't get compensated. It doesn't seem right that there can be rules and laws. If I take away your house or I take away your property, you should be compensated for it. So that's what that's trying to drive. It's trying to say, hey, if you're going to take that, then do a fair market value and compensate me for it. So that seems reasonable to me. So those are two. There's a couple of transportation ones out there and other ones, but I really think those are ones that I would be supporting anyways.
Good. We do have a couple minutes left, so I want you to think about some final thoughts that you want to leave with us. I wanted to see if there's any questions from the audience. We might have time for one or maybe two. If you have a question for either one of our panelists. Or we can all go home. It looks like there's one.
This is a question for Ed. Ed, do you think it's likely
I think it's at a point that it always ebbs and flows. I think he'll end up being nominated and passed at the end of the day. And I think one of the things that will bring in some of the Democrats is that Trump really picked someone that, while conservative, is kind of a moderate conservative, if you will, as opposed to some of the people he could have picked. And I think some of the Democrats that are more moderate will realize that if they throw this one out, they probably have a much tougher choice to make in the future. So I think it will pass.
Great. Chip, any final words you want to leave us with? I have a few to close us out.
Thanks. I'm so proud of the industry. I'm so proud of what you guys do every day. And our message doesn't get out there as nearly as it should. We've increased production in the state, 400% since 2011. Our emissions are down, 40, 45%. I mean, the things we do, the regulations we do, we have very strong regulations here. Things you guys do every day to make Colorado better. We have hundreds and thousands of families here. I'm just so proud of this industry, so I just want to thank you for what you guys do every day to make this state valuable.
Great. Thanks. How about a round of applause for Ed Goes and Chip Reimer? I want to just wrap up our conference. I want to thank our conference steering committee for all the great work that you did. I want to thank our sponsors that make this all possible. Thank you so much for your support for our industry and for the Colorado Oil and Gas Association. I want to let everybody know that if you want to continue to have a little fun, the Women's Energy Network of Colorado is hosting an informal happy hour starting at 5 o'clock at the Hotel Teatro Wine Cellar, and all of you are welcome. And finally, I want to thank all of you for being here. I hope that you enjoyed yourself. I hope that you found the conversation to be invigorating, even challenging. I hope that you met someone new, made some good contacts, networking, perhaps made some friends here over the past 2 days. And I hope that you're leaving here inspired, knowing that the work that you do each day changes our lives for the better in Colorado and across our great country. And you're certainly making our country safer and our communities better. As Chip said, this election is going to be monumental for our industry. So as you leave here, I hope that you are committed to fighting for your livelihood. I've got a few simple things that you can do. The first thing is register to vote. If you're not registered to vote, please go to the Colorado Secretary of State's office. Take care of that tonight. The second thing is sign that COGA pledge. There's cards at your table. Take them home, give them to your friends. That's a way that we're going to stay engaged and informed and stay united throughout this process. Text WIN 2018 to 77948. Number 3, know your candidates. We're going to create an online voters guide this fall. You'll be able to go onto our COGA website, type your address in, see the candidates that support our industry. So when you hit the ballot, you know the people that you want to vote for, the people who have your back. 4, speak up. Tell your friends your personal energy story, why your job matters to you, why it matters to your family, the things that you are all doing to make our lives better in the 21st century, to make our communities stronger and our country safer. You are our best advocates. Tell your story. And if you're not just telling your friends, as Chip said, post it on social media, write a letter to the editor, write an op-ed, get it out there, make sure your voice is heard. And 5, this is the easiest one, vote. Vote, my friends. We have an important election coming up. I want to thank everybody for being here. We will be back here next year, August 26th to the 28th. We'll see you then. Thank you all.